Welcome to the Big Book Club. I'm Damien Barr, and tonight's show comes to you from Lanark Memorial Hall. It's time to make sure your doors are locked and dust off your detecting skills because our theme is crime. Tonight's misdemeanours range from the theft of a supermarket parking space to murder most foul, and each story features some very important bones. Doing time with me on the sofa tonight are Val McDermid, Professor Dame Sue Black and Richard Osman. And our poet tonight is Iona Lee. I'll also be meeting with the Neilston Book Group to dissect one of this week's reads. My first guest has sold over 16 million books and yet is not even officially classified as a religion. Still Life is her 34th novel and sees the return of DCI Karen Pirie. It's the thrilling story of two sisters, two brothers and two bodies. One fished out the fourth and another now just bones. It kept me up all night. I didn't guess the end, but I promise no spoilers. It's the Queen of Crime and reigning Wraith Rovers superfan, Val McDermid. Hiya, Val.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm very good. It's very lovely to have you here. Will you give us a wee reading before we have a chat?
Yes, of course. I'm going to read from Still Life, the new novel, and I'm going to read a slightly edited version of the opening. I always like reading from the opening because then I don't have to explain who anybody is or why they're doing what they're doing. So, this is the prologue for Still Life. Billy Watson cast off from the quay without the faintest flicker of a premonition. He nosed the 23-foot creel boat out into the East Harbour's main channel with casual familiarity. The morning was no different from countless others, bitterly cold, a sharp northerly wind slicing through flesh and making his cheekbones ache. But at least it was fair, and the eggshell blue February sky held no promise of rain to come. The chill waters of the Firth of Forth parted before the scarlet and white bows of the Bonnie Pearl, a thin line of white foam marking her passage. They left the shelter of the harbour for the choppier waters beyond the zigzag pier that stretched into the sea, protecting the harbour walls from the tide-line surges that swept along the coast. A touch on the wheel, and their course shifted till they were heading east, the Isle of May breasting the horizon like a humpback whale. As they drew level with the old windmill and the salt pans, Billy slipped the engine into neutral, and in a practised manoeuvre brought the Bonnie Pearl alongside the first marker buoy. Even from the wheelhouse, Billy could see there was a problem. The rope was taut, but no creel had emerged from the water. Billy could see Jackie swearing eloquently, his words whipped away by the wind. A rogue wave caught the bow and swung the boat through 90 degrees, enough to make the men's job easier. They staggered back a couple of feet, giving Billy a clear view of what was in the water. For a moment, it made no sense. Billy's brain translated the strange sight into a battered white creeldan with slash marks. Then he recalibrated. No boy ever came with a neck and shoulders. The first catch of the day was a drowned man.
So I suspect murder.
No, really?
And because it's Fife, they just put him in some batter and they had it, and that was that, and that's the end.
Yep.
So that's a very kind of grisly opening for the novel. That's the first of two bodies that turn up, both in quite different states. Sue will be able to tell us more about that in a wee minute. But this one's reasonably fresh?
Yes, it just got into the water the night before with a blow to the head on the way in to make it a bit more quick, I suppose.
And tell us about the second of the two bodies that we meet.
Well, the second of the two bodies appears in much more mysterious circumstances. A woman, early middle age, dies in an unfortunate road accident. She's on her bike and she gets run over. And her sister is left to deal with her estate, and she goes to sort out the house. And in the garage, she finds a camper van, which is quite bewildering to her because, as far as she was aware, her sister didn't have a camper van. And inside the camper van, even more disturbingly, is a skeletonized body.
Dun, dun, dun. Again, surrounded by maggot casings, which you describe as Cocoa Pops.
Yes, and that is the professor's fault.
Wow.
I said to Sue...
Exactly what they look like. They look like Cocoa Pops.
Yes.
A little pupae,
so
the pupae that are left by the maggot.
I hope no one's watching this over breakfast, Sue.
But
We always relate things to food.
That's one of Sue's qualities. She's a great communicator. It's one of the reasons why her books are so accessible, because she understands about conveying things in terms that people understand. And I've had some stunning images from Sue before. I once asked her, what would a pubic scalp look like in a jar of formaldehyde?
A pubic scalp?
Pubic scalp, yes.
Are we talking like American? Like...
No, that's a fake pubes. That's fake
the area
the actual,
of...
yes.
Right.
During the Welsh Wars in the 13th century, the English had a bounty on a Welsh scalp, and they didn't mind if it was a head scalp or a pubic scalp.
Shut up. I've never heard the expression. I have managed to get through my life without hearing the expression pubic scalp.
Please don't tell me it looks like shredded wheat.
I don't.
It gets better than that.
So Sue thought for a moment. I said, what would this look like in a jar of formaldehyde? And she said, tinned tuna.
Oh.
So that was my lunch out the window for the next 6 months.
It might be my lunch at any possible moment. So anyway, thank you, Sue, for gifting all of that to Val. So we've got the skeleton surrounded by Cocoa Pops in the back of the van, and we've got the body that was pulled out of the Forth, and the person who ends up looking after poor, both of these unfortunate souls is DCI Karen Perry, who of course works for historic cases, sorry. And where do we find Karen? Because obviously you've written several books with her in there before. At what state in her life do we find Karen at the start of the book?
She was the head of cold cases in Fife, and then of course it became Police Scotland. So she now heads up the Historic Cases Unit of Police Scotland, which doesn't exist in reality. So I can do anything I like with it, and nobody can say, but that's not how it is. So the Cold Case Unit basically is Karen and her sidekick, DC Jason Murray, known as the Mint. And they get embroiled in all sorts of cases that are not immediately open cases. Although in this case, the first body looks like it should be a fresh murder investigation, it emerges very quickly when they identify the body that he's in fact the prime suspect in a mysterious disappearance 10 years before, a disappearance that was thought to be probably a murder. So it falls into Karen's lap. And of course, the one that's a skeleton is inevitably a historic case, because that didn't happen last week.
No, it takes a wee while. How long, Sue, for somebody in a camper van to become a skeleton?
Depends on the environment, but it can be, if it's warm and if it's moist, then certainly within 18 months.
Only 18 months to become like...
Warmer. If it's cold, it'll take longer.
OK. So this happened in Perth, so it could have taken centuries.
I'd love to see that as a challenge on Top Gear.
In a camper van.
What is Karen's motivation for being in this unit, for being involved in crimes that have seemingly taken place a long time ago?
She likes answers, and she also has a profound sense of the importance of giving closure to people whose loved ones have died in mysterious circumstances, usually violent circumstances. She has a really strong sense of wanting to let these people have a final answer to what happened to people they care about.
I think what was interesting to me is that what she encounters in her job is not just, righting the wrongs of the past, that a criminal's committed, but righting the wrongs of the past that the police have committed. She's having to deal with police who've got stuff wrong, at the very least, hasn't she? So that brings her into conflict. Yes,
it does sometimes. And she is, she's fi Fife. So she has those marvellous Fife qualities of thrownness and gallousness, which mean that she's often a thorn in the side of her superior officers who like things to be neat. And Karen isn't neat.
She's now got a partner as well. Tell us about him.
Hamish is slightly tongue-in-cheek. I think he's a bit like Jamie in Outlander in terms of, being this sort of big, handsome, bearded man with a kilt. And when she first meets him, she thinks he's a crofter, not unreasonably, because he has a croft in Wester Ross. But she discovers pretty soon that that's only half of who Hamish is, and his other half is he's got a chain of hipster coffee bars in Edinburgh. There's clearly a powerful attraction between them, but there's also conflicts between them. I mean, they have very different backgrounds, and Karen finds that quite a struggle. And she has some ridiculous conversations as a result with her friends, where she's going like, he never listens to what I want. He took me to Venice for my birthday. I wanted to go up to Wester Ross for the weekend, but no, we had to go to Venice. So, and we've all been in those ridiculous situations where we think someone's not listening to us in a relationship. So it's a relationship where he's trying desperately to impress her and trying desperately to do the right thing, and doesn't always quite manage it.
Like I say, I didn't guess the ending, and the book takes a really unexpected turn. We get into the French Legion. That had to be fun to research. I mean, maybe more fun for me than for you, but it had to be good fun finding out about it.
I was really interested in the little discoveries that I made along the way particularly about identity in the French Foreign Legion. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's a lot of interesting stuff around the French Foreign Legion.
And is that all true? People will read it and find it. So that is all true, everything that you say in there?
I try as far as possible to be accurate. So when I'm doing the forensic science stuff and things like that, I try and get that as accurate as I possibly can. Settings, I try to get as accurate as I possibly can. Where it's reasonable to be accurate and authentic, I will do that, because that helps the reader to believe all the lies I'm telling them.
Right. And we never quite know when you're doing it, which is the joy of it, the great joy of it.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope people are convinced by what they read.
Is Sue River. Sue River being the red-haired anthropologist in Dundee. She looked at her like that. Like, I mean, come on, there aren't that many of them.
She did have a Professor Brown in one book from Dundee.
Yes.
Didn't you?
I did, yes. Yes. She's Sue in the sense that she's a forensic anthropologist, but she's not like Sue in terms of personality. And the only way that she really resembles Sue is that she's ginger. She's
ginger, OK. And a forensic anthropologist in Dundee, and brilliant. Which is another... And also at the end of it, though, she does say that River's off to write a book about other cases and put some personal stuff in there as well, which is slightly what Sue...
Well, that was a bit of a joke. That was a bit of a private joke.
It's not that private. She's published a book about it. We're going to talk about it in a wee minute. It's all real. I want to talk to you for a wee minute when people talk about, Tartan Noir or Scottish crime writing. Like, what are the qualities that you think make it particularly Scottish?
Well, I think there are certain distinctive qualities. I think mostly, generally, and obviously there are exceptions to this, but if you're reading a book that's been written by someone in the north or south of England, you will know that that's not been written by somebody Scottish. There is a difference, and it comes from a different history, culture, politics, music, song, everything. Jokes, even,
Your books are very funny.
Thank you.
And Richard, I'm not saying your books aren't funny. Your books are very funny.
They're differently funny.
English.
They're so English.
Oh, my goodness.
And not even just English, Kent.
Oh,
I mean...
Thank you.
But I think Scottish crime fiction has a fascination with the psychology of crime, and also the tradition that runs right through Scottish literature, not just crime fiction, of the doppelganger.
The doubleness.
The doubleness.
Yeah.
The two faces, and what Hugh McDermid called the Caledonian antisyzygy, the yoking together of two opposing forces. So you've got on the one hand the sort of dour Presbyterian, you can't have fun, you can't enjoy yourself, and on the other hand you've got the sort of Celtic side with the music and the dance and the storytelling. So these are the forces that are in us from the beginning.
Your pace of writing is phenomenal to me. I find this about a lot of crime writers, and I just wonder how you do it, like where you find the energy and the impetus to go from idea to idea to idea like that. Do you not just want to stop and bask in your brilliance?
I'd be really bored.
Would you be bored?
Really bored. I'm not comfortable with myself when I'm not writing or thinking about the book or working on the next book. And I mean, I think the thing is, and I don't know if you feel this about your own work, that it's the next book that's always the most exciting one, not the one you're doing at the moment. That's the thing to get out of the way, to get on to the next book that you're really fascinated by and interested in.
Totally.
And a book generally takes me about between 3 and 4 months to get on the page.
Right.
But that's fine, because then I've got the rest of the year to go around and do book festivals and have nice conversations with people like you and think about the next book and get that knocked into shape, or do other projects. I mean, increasingly, in recent years, I've been involved in doing other projects that are not directly related to writing novels, and that's been fun as well.
You did your collection, which I was happy to do an essay for, which was I
Imagine
really
a Country,
which
was really quite different. It's a collection of essays. We asked people to say what they would like to see in the country they would like to live in. We gave you 500 to 800 words, and we got an astonishing array of suggestions. And
I was really surprised by some of the stuff that I read in there,
really
and how non-partisan they were. It was very much about quality of life and the things that people loved, things people wanted to share.
We invited as wide a spread as we could get of Scottish civic society, except politicians, because they have a pulpit. And we deliberately approached people from all sides of the political divides. And we hoped that we'd get that kind of spread. And I think it's... I mean, when we put it together last autumn when we were in New Zealand, which was really interesting to do it at a distance. And then, of course, it came out the week we went into lockdown.
It did, that's right.
So that grand launch event that we'd planned at iWrite ended up being a grand online launch. But we've had amazing responses from people reading it in lockdown, saying that what we needed in this time was a flicker of hope, a flicker of imagination, a sense that we could build something better. And I think that was at the heart of it. So yeah, that was an unexpected project to do. And I've got a short story collection coming out next month as well, called Christmas is Murder.
Called Christmas is Murder?
Christmas is Murder, yes.
Everybody watching identifies with that. Like, yep.
You can all sit on Christmas Day and read Christmas is Murder.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show, Val. It was a pleasure.
A delight.
Now, my next guest can name every bone in your body, and she's one of the very few people who can decipher the secrets held within those bones. A world-leading expert on anatomy and forensic anthropology, the truth she uncovers is often stranger than fiction. Her latest book is also her most personal. To reveal what's written in bone, it's Professor Dame Sue Black. It's lovely to have you on the show.
You.
So tell me, just before you read a wee bit from the book, just so people understand, what exactly is it a forensic anthropologist does and doesn't do?
OK, so there are two words in there, and the words are different, and they're very different in that the forensic bit comes from the Latin forensis, meaning pertaining to the forum, and the forum were the courts of Rome. So anything forensic means that you're an expert witness to the court. The anthropologist is the study of the human. So the forensic anthropology is the study of the human, or what remains of the human, for medical legal purposes. And where a pathologist's main focus is on the manner of death or the cause of death, our focus is on, are the remains human? Who was that person when they were alive? So we focus on identification rather than a cause or a manner of death.
OK, now we understand that. Please give us a wee reading.
Thank you, you're very kind. Experts learn to read different parts of the bones for their own purposes. A clinician will look to the soft tissues and organs for signs of disease, and a clinical pathologist may examine biopsies of tumours or categorise changes in cells to establish the nature or the progression of a pathology or a condition. The forensic pathologist will focus on the cause and manner of the death, while the forensic toxicologist analyses body fluids, including blood, urine, vitreous humour from the eye, or cerebrospinal fluid to determine if drugs or alcohol have been consumed. With so many scientific disciplines all focusing on their own niche, sometimes with unblinking myopism, the bigger picture can often be obscured. For the clinician and the pathologist, the bones might be just something to crack open with pincers or an electric saw in order to get to the organs inside. And only if there's trauma or obvious pathology will they be given more than a cursory glance. Forensic biologists are more interested in the cells that hide in the spaces within the bones than they are in the bones themselves. They'll slice the bone, grind it down to a powder to get to the nuclear coding hidden in its depths. The forensic odontologist gets excited by teeth, but perhaps less so by the bones that hold them. So the song of the skeleton may go unheard, and yet this is the most durable component of our bodies, often lasting for centuries, keeping its memories safe for a long time after the story told by the soft tissues has been lost. If identity can be established from DNA, fingerprints, or dental matching, nobody is much interested in the bones until all the other work is done and the experts have moved on to pastures new. And it may be months, sometimes years, after a body is found before the forensic anthropologist enters the picture and the bones are at last called upon to give up their memories. The scientist has no control, of course, over what they have to work with. The more recent the remains or the more complete the skeleton, the more of the story we can hope to recover. But unfortunately, human bodies are not always found intact or in good condition. The passage of time metes out its ravages on a discarded, concealed, or buried corpse. Animals consume and destroy bones, and the physical effects of weather, soil, and chemistry conspire against retention of the song of a life lived. The forensic anthropologist must be able to try to retrieve a part of its tune from just about anything, and to do that, we need to know what to look for and where to find it. If multiple bones tell a similar story, we can have confidence in our opinion. If only a single bone is recovered, we will necessarily need to be more cautious about how we interpret what it is saying to us. And like our fictional counterparts, we need to keep our feet on the ground and our heads out of the clouds.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I was grimly fascinated by a great deal of stuff in this book, and I learned a lot. I did not know that bones bleed.
Well, yes, because they're a living organ inside you. So we think about bones because the only time we see them is when they're dry, dead, dusty things in a museum or whatever it may be. But while they're inside you, they are a living organ. So if you cut them, they bleed. If you cut them, they hurt. Or if you break them, they hurt. And they're going to very, very quickly want to get back to the same shape they were in before you damage them. So they heal themselves. So they're a very, very active living organ that needs a huge blood supply, but also needs a vast amount of nutrients to be able to make sure that it carries on performing that function. Because as you grow older, your bones change. They keep turning over for the entirety of your life.
So I didn't understand this until I read it in your book, and then I went off on a mad Google spiral. So, like, your bones replace themselves, essentially. Your whole skeleton replaces itself every how many years?
Well, it depends on which bit of the bone.
Right.
So what we call trabecular bone, which looks a bit like the inside of honeycomb, and that's the bone we have at the top of our hips or at the bottom of our knees, for example. That will replace itself quite quickly, and often every sort of 5 years or so, you'll have replaced much of the trabecular
So, like,
bone.
hip replacement every 5 years naturally inside yourself, over
Bit by bit,
by bit.
Yeah,
That's
but
remarkable.
the compact bone, so that's like the ivory that's on the outside, that takes about 15 years.
Right.
But so every sort of 15 years, most of you, but not all of you, has completely replaced itself.
What does not replace you?
In terms of bone, there is a piece of bone that sits right at the base of the skull, and it's formed when you're a fetus. Inside mum, before mum probably even knows she's pregnant, this bit of bone is forming, and it forms the inner part of your ear. And there's a capsule forms around it, and that bone doesn't remodel. So it can't afford to, because that's where your sense of balance is, and it's where your sense of hearing is. And if that grows, then you're likely to lose the necessary connections that make hearing possible. So we form that inner ear in the size and the shape that it needs to be before you're born, that will carry you through all the way to adulthood. And if you think about when bone is laid down, the only place that the nutrients can come from is what your mum is eating. So the bone that is made from your mum's lunch, when, you know, she just about knew she was pregnant with you. And if we look at what comprises that bone, so there's some very clever people that will look at things called stable isotopes. They can look at the stable isotopes and they can tell from the ratio of those isotopes where it is that your mother was living before you were born.
Because of the level of background radiation, or?
It's a mixture, so it's about isotopes, stable isotopes of oxygen, of nitrogen, of various other components. And they tend to, we think our diet is terribly cosmopolitan, and it really isn't. It's actually quite local, and especially our water is local. And we have maps from across the world of the composition of water, and your bone just reflects that. So it puts an entirely different concept of, you know, your mother forever being inside your head, because she genuinely is.
She really
what she was
is.
eating when she had for our lunch.
What's that bone called?
It's called the otic capsule.
Otic capsule. What were you going to say there, Val?
It's a piece of information that got me into a bit of trouble once, didn't it, Sue? Sue told me this, and I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I just dropped it into the next book, like you do, with a really piece of information that makes you go, wow.
Yeah.
And then Sue rang me up and said, you might have waited till I'd published the paper.
That's the trouble, is that often, you know, she'll phone up. She's very naughty. She'll phone up and she'll say, just checking out how you are. No, she isn't. What she's doing, she's on a fishing trip. And every now and again, something will come up, and I'll say, you know, can you just let me publish it first?
When you publish that, they go, oh, you nicked that off Val McDermid.
That's it. That's exactly what they say. Who's the expert here?
Plagiarising Val. And I was shocked by the story of you boarding a plane with two human heads.
Well, it's what I've always said, is sometimes what we go through in reality, you wouldn't expect to happen in fiction, because if you put it into fiction, they would say it's not true. And this was Gian Stevenin, who was in Verona, and it was a lovely opportunity to go to Verona. But his particular liking was for prostitutes, and he would pick them up, he would take them to his farmhouse, and he would increasingly ask them to do more and more explicit things. And he wanted to photograph them. And one prostitute that he picked up got very uncomfortable with the nature of what he was asking, and she persuaded him to take her into Verona, and she would clear her bank account effectively, and because she was prepared to pay him off. When she got to the toll, she jumped out of the car, and there was a police car there, and she got in, and she said, I'm a prostitute, but this guy's seriously scary. He was arrested at that point, and then they started to look around his farmhouse and his farmyard, and they dug all sorts of holes around the farmyard, and they started to find bodies. They knew that there were several prostitutes from the area who were missing, but there were two girls in particular who were missing, and we had photographs of them, but we had no family, and so we couldn't go and trace familial DNA at that stage. And they asked if we were able to do something that's called a facial superimposition. So that is, you take the photograph, you then take the skull, and you try and match them, because technically, if people's eyes are different shapes, if their mouth is a different shape, you won't be able to get the skull to fit into the photograph. But it meant that what I had to do, because they didn't have the capability in Italy, was to take the skulls over to the UK. But they weren't skulls, that's the whole point. They were fleshed. They had quite a lot of maggot activity, so they're very wet and very smelly in the process. And so what they decided they would do is they would put each of the heads into white buckets that you could seal. And then, so that we didn't disturb anyone in the airport, I would carry them into very expensive designer carrier bags of a particular. I couldn't possibly name which company it was. Couldn't possibly.
Gucci heads.
Couldn't name it, so that it didn't look obvious. And I carried two letters, one in Italian and one in English, that said what I was carrying. So you can imagine that you get to the first security point, and they say, put your bags on the scanner, and you go, no, read the letter. So they read the letter and went, go. And so then I got onto the plane, and of course the air hostess said, no, you need to put your bags in the hold. So I gave her the English letter, and she was utterly horrified, but she moved me into business class, which I thought was very nice.
Upgrade. Upgrade.
But it was as if they put razor wire around me, because she totally ignored me then for the entirety of the flight, like I was a plague victim. So I got off there, and then you arrive in Heathrow. And when you go through Heathrow, you have to decide, do I declare or do I not declare? And I was brought up properly.
Well, you said you have to decide. You had to decide.
Yeah, I have to decide. Do you go through the green channel or the red channel? And I was brought up properly, so I thought I'll go through the green. I will declare. So I'm carrying my bags, and a very bored man sitting with his feet up on the desk. And he sort of looked at me and he said, are they for your own consumption? At which point I thought, no, you need to read the letter. So he read the letter and then, again, just shooed me on. So I was into Heathrow. I then had to get through the next security to get to Glasgow. And so, again, you're on the scanner. And he went, no, we need to open them. And I said, OK, well, I need to warn you, because he then went to open them. I went, no, because if you open these, what you have is a decomposing head.
Oh, my God.
Moving in maggots that has, the stench that you can imagine. And he sort of turned a bit green and went, now you can go. So I then get onto the flight from Heathrow up to Glasgow, have the same problem with the air steward. And he this time put me to the back of the plane and moved everybody else up to business class. And I got the entire way from Verona to Glasgow without anybody ever looking inside those buckets. You couldn't write that.
You gave a lot of people...
I have to tell you, Sue, that is one of the first stories you ever told me. And I thought, this woman is gold.
I love the fact the whole story begins with you saying, and it was a lovely opportunity to visit Verona.
It was gorgeous. I loved Verona.
You gave all of those people amazing anecdotes that I'm sure they bring out at every opportunity.
Probably.
But that man was terrifying. You had to face him in court when you gave evidence, and your evidence was critical in securing his conviction.
We were able to identify, we believed, both of the females who were missing, and that was extremely important.
Yeah.
We were then subsequently able to find families, so we could get to familial DNA. But giving evidence in a court is a really difficult place for a scientist to be. It's an alien environment. And this
Is it? Because it's all about facts, surely, is it not?
No, it's a game. No, it's a game. So we have an adversarial system, and you go into the courtroom as an expert. It's not your playing board. It's not your pieces, it's not your rules. And being adversarial, one side of the room wants to make you into the world's leading expert, and the other side of the room wants to make you a blithering idiot. And you will come out of the court either an expert or an idiot, and I've been both. It just depends who does their job best on the day.
So how, when you're dealing with stuff like that, you know, cases like that, evil like that, and the reaction it induces in you, you want to find justice, truth, so you can get to justice. How do you deal with that emotionally? I don't mean squeamishly, I mean emotionally when you're dealing with those crimes, because it was very hard for me. Your book was the hardest book to read.
Sorry. I don't want it to be hard.
No, but it is, because you're reading about real people. With Val's and Richard's, they weren't real people, and the pleasure was intellectual and emotional in their relationships and the friendships. The bodies were props for a story. They were safe. With yours, I cried, and I did find it hard, and I wonder how you deal with that emotionally.
I think probably one of the best bits of advice I was ever given was from Charlie Hepburn, who was head of CID in Inverness, Northern Constabulary, of course, which doesn't exist anymore. And what Charlie said to me was, first of all, he said to me, don't do the cases, because once they're in your head, they never come out, but I was never going to listen to him anyway. And the advice that he gave me was, don't own the guilt. Let it go. You're not responsible for the crime. You're not responsible for finding somebody guilty. Your job is find the evidence, collect the evidence, analyse the evidence, and present the evidence. Everything else is up to the other players, whether they are the police or the jury. That's not your job.
What's going to happen to your bones?
Well...
Long may they stay inside of you.
Thank you so much.
But what is going to happen to them when they're...
So I would be a hypocrite of an anatomist if I didn't leave my body to medical dissection. So I have signed my papers, and when the time comes, I will go back to the Val McDermid mortuary in Dundee.
Wait there, is that? I didn't realise that.
Is that a thing? The Val McDermid mortuary.
How thrilled are you about that, Val?
Absolutely delighted.
So I'll go there, and I will be embalmed with the Teal method, which is something we brought into the UK. And then I'll be moved upstairs to the Stuart McBride dissecting room, and I want to be dissected. But I don't want to be dissected by medics or dentists, because they don't have enough time. I want to be dissected by science students, because then they can get to every single little rip apart, every bit of muscle and bone and everything else. Then when they're finished, collect all the soft tissue, and then you can cremate that, and that will disappear because there'll be nothing left. But I want them to bring my bones together. I want them to boil them down, because you have to get rid of the fat. And then I'd really love to be strung up as a skeleton, because then I could be in the Val McDermid mortuary in the Stuart McBride dissecting room teaching for the rest of my death. And that seems the most suitable thing to want to be when you grow up as an articulated skeleton. And my daughters, who are just about as mad as I am, I suppose, said, "Mum, that's really cool, because when you and Dad die, you know, I don't really want to go to a cemetery and, you know, you're not there, but we could come and visit you." I said, yeah, you could. They could actually physically come and visit me in the dissecting room. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
It would be wonderful. And it was bonkers, mad, but wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to spend time with me.
Thank you so much indeed. Thank you.
Now, they might sound twee, but cosy crime novels are devious. They make the everyday dangerous, turning teaspoons into murder weapons and neighbours into suspects. The Thursday Murder Club is the delightful debut novel by Richard Osman. It tells the story of 4 fascinating friends in a plush retirement community who prefer puzzling over cold cases to tackling Sudoku. When a real-life murder happens on their manicured grounds, Joyce, Elizabeth, Ibrahim and Ron couldn't be more thrilled. Will they find the killer? And if they do, will they remember? Before I talked to Richard, I got together with the Nielsen Book Group to find out if they guessed who done it. Sunshine Over Nielsen is a fantastic title for a novel, and I hope somebody's writing it now. Christopher Brookmeyer was born just down the road, but I'm here today to meet a local book group to find out what they think of Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club. Hiya.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Very good, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Feels that they were sitting here in a circle. It's like we should confess.
Let's not.
So, how did you start the book group, Lindy?
My mum had got me a really beautiful book for my Christmas, and I just wanted to kind of share it with other people. And it's probably, I think it might even been January the 1st, I put a post on the village page that Anna had runs and just said, I expect to be laughed off it, come and join me in the book club. Just thinking 6, 7 people in my kitchen, be fine. And then we ended up meeting the first time in February and 23 people came along.
Are you from Neilston?
I'm not from the village, no.
Right.
My husband was born about a street away from here. And when I came to the village, I didn't know anyone except him. There's people now that I would go and have a coffee with that I never knew before, stand and talk to them in the middle of co-op. We'd have a wee chat, so... Yeah.
But not about the books, because that would make the queue long. That would be
We
quite...
do sometimes, we shout up the queue to each other, we're like, I'm loving it, where are you at?
Have you all got to know each other better because of the book group, do you think?
Absolutely. It's become a real social occasion when we meet once a month. And although I'm the oldest one here today, there is a real mix of age groups, and it's just lovely. But when you get older, you're not as involved in the village life as I was earlier on in my life. So it's been great to meet people and meet people out with my age group as well.
I really enjoy the book club. I like reading, but for me, sometimes I need the motivation to pick up the book. So the book club for me gives me that motivation.
I'm a single parent, so for me it's the one time in a month I know I will get out and for a couple of hours and just have a chat with adults instead of with a child.
Got fairly young kids and had gotten out of the way of reading, and so it's just been a chance to get back into books and have a chance to socialise and chat about it with other people.
For the latest read, the group have picked Richard Osman's debut novel. It's a strange thing to say for a crime novel, but this is actually delightful despite the body count. Thursday Murder Club happens in Cooper's Chase, where 4 older friends get together every week and try to solve some cold cases. Then, thrillingly, a real-life murder happens and they have to solve it. Let's find out what the book club think.
Loved it, yeah, really enjoyed it.
Universal nods?
Yes.
Yeah.
The book was really about the characters and their backstory, and you know, it was 4 people that came from completely different backgrounds that probably wouldn't have been friends had it not been for them living in this retirement village, and they all brought different skills that they used to help solve these murders. But for me, the main story was the characters and their journey and what they were going through.
Who was your favourite character?
I liked Joyce.
Yeah.
I thought there was quite a strong Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson vibe going on between Elizabeth and Joyce. Yeah. You know, I loved Ibrahim as well. I thought, you know, the former therapist. Oh, I thought he was lovely. There was some sadness there as well.
That was a great thing about the book. It was witty, it was entertaining. There was these one-liners that we all got you laughing, but there was these themes also of kind of grief and sadness for everyone in it. It felt like life, didn't it?
What did you think about the way older people are represented in the book? Did you find it patronising or did you think it was accurate?
I love that the characters were older in it, because I think when people get old, you forget that when they were younger, they led very, very full lives. Yeah. No, I didn't find it patronising at all, and I kind of identified with some of it as well.
Let you get on with the rest of the book chat. See you later. Thank you. Bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye. So the really good news is they loved it.
It's a relief.
And they were very surprised that you'd actually written it, because they thought that it was one of these celebrity books.
Oh, yeah.
You see.
Well, that's the worry, and I wrote it in secret because of exactly that thing. I mean, I don't think the world is missing another TV presenter writing a book. I don't think that's what people are crying out for, but I've always been a writer, and that was my worry when I wrote it. I really had to have some people I trusted look me in the eye, and I had to say to them, is this an actual proper book? You have to tell me. And they did. And the lovely thing for me is when it started selling to America and Spain and France and China, they don't know who I am. That's the good news. So I knew that then they liked the book, they liked the characters, they liked the story. But yeah, I agree with the book club. I would be very suspicious of me.
Yes, they were deeply suspicious, but they were delighted by it. As was I. I have to say, I found it very, very, very funny and very touching at points. And the relationships that you depict, we'll get into that in a wee bit. But there were a couple of moments where I wept for the love of it all.
Oh, that's nice.
We could easily have done this in a love episode, actually, rather than a crime episode, because it is a book full of love.
It would have been harder to get Sue in the love episode, I think. But, I just mean the anecdotes, not your personality.
Dig the hole.
Very
Keep digging the hole. Yeah.
So you said just then about having always been a writer.
Yeah.
This is your first novel.
Yes.
So why crime and why now?
Well, crime because crime's what I read, and like with my TV career, I think you should only really do the thing that you love, because otherwise, who are you? So in TV, I make the sort of shows that I would like to watch, and in books, I wanted to write the sort of book that I loved reading. And the truth is, I would have done it a long time ago, but you sort of, and everyone knows this, you go into a career, and I went into television because it's what I love, and it sort of takes over your life, and you're enormously busy, and the momentum keeps you going and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, suddenly it's 25 years later, and that's where I found myself. And, you know, it just occurred to me a few years ago, this is the thing that I always wanted to do, you know, and an idea struck me as well. And that's the time I thought, well, look, why don't you give it a go? Why don't you just sit down and do 1,000 words a day and see where it gets you? And I got up to 20,000 odd words, and I got to the stage, and I'm sure Val has done similar things where I thought this is going to be harder not to write now than to write. Really, it'd be harder for me to give this up than it would be to continue.
That's a very lovely tipping point, I think, when you reach that as well.
I mean, both are awful. Having to continue writing is really hard and really difficult, but actually saying, just locking it away, I thought I would have had trouble with, I think.
Give us a wee reading, please.
OK. I never read from it, really.
I'm delighted that you've consented to do so.
That's quite fun. I consented to do it, like I'm the Queen. I want to read a bit. A lot of it is narrated by a character called Joyce, who's a former nurse.
Love Joyce.
So some of it is in the form of her diary. And right at the beginning, she's talking about the first time she ever joins the Thursday Murder Club, which, as you say, are these 4 people who look out over unsolved cases. So she's talking about the first time that she met them in her diary. I was nervous at the time, I remember that. I took along a nice bottle of wine, $8.99, to give you an idea. And as I walked in, the 3 of them were already there in the jigsaw room, laying out photographs on the table. It's called the jigsaw room, by the way, because that is where the bigger jigsaws are completed on a gently sloping wooden table in the centre of the room. When I first walked in, there was a 2,000-piecer of Whitstable Harbour missing a letterbox of sky. I once went to Whitstable, just for the day, but I couldn't really see what the fuss was all about. Once you've done the oysters, there's no real shopping to speak of. Elizabeth had formed the Thursday Murder Club with Penny. Penny had been an inspector in the Kent Police for many years, and she would bring along the files of unsolved murder cases. She wasn't really supposed to have the files, but who was to know? After a certain age, you can pretty much do whatever takes your fancy. No one tells you off, except for your doctors and your children. Elizabeth and Penny would go through every file, line by line, study every photograph, read every witness statement, just looking for anything that had been missed. They didn't like to think they were guilty people still happily going about their business, sitting in their gardens doing a Sudoku, knowing they'd got away with murder. Also, I think that Penny and Elizabeth just thoroughly enjoyed it. A few glasses of wine and a mystery, very social, but also gory. It is good fun. They would meet every Thursday. That's how they came up with the name. It was Thursday because there was a 2-hour slot free in the jigsaw room between art history and conversational French. It was booked, and still is booked, under the name Japanese Opera, A Discussion, which ensured they were always left in peace.
I did immediately go on YouTube and look for Japanese operas, and I can see very well why they wouldn't be disturbed. Yeah.
Not many people are Googling that.
So Joyce is a former nurse. She keeps a diary, and we dip in and out of her diary throughout, and we get a really good sense of her as a character. She's got a very strong sense of right and wrong. And I mentioned at the start of the show that one of the crimes is somebody taking a parking space they shouldn't have, and that is a real crime in Joyce's eyes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's not the key inciting incident of the book, but it's a little bit of colour.
Well, there's a lot of colour, and she's very observant. She doesn't miss much.
She doesn't.
And she pairs up with Elizabeth. Tell us about Elizabeth.
Well, Elizabeth is very different to Joyce, and the lovely thing about the book is it's about people in their 70s who are very different to each other. It's about forming new friendships later in life. So Joyce, used to be a nurse. She is overlooked. She is seen as harmless, which anyone who knows any nurses in their 70s know couldn't be further from the truth. Elizabeth hints an awful lot at what she used to do. She never comes out and says it, but she gives enough hints that we understand that she was very high up in MI6 and MI5 during her career. So, as an ex-spy, the four of them have to try and get to the heart of the police investigation. That's the key, which is sort of impossible, because if you're in your 70s, you can't actually access the police records of a murder that's just happened. You can't interview suspects and so on. But Elizabeth has a number of people she can call upon from her former career. And the fact that as people in their 70s, they're so overlooked as well, means other doors open to them. So the whole story really is how these people might be able to get to the heart of an ongoing police investigation, which they do, I would say, with some skill.
Some great skill. So, and Elizabeth is kind of a Sherlock Holmes, and Joyce is kind of a Dr. Watson to her. In a way, Elizabeth is tweedy and commanding, and has resources, and Joyce is medically trained and seemingly bumbling, yet not.
Yeah, exactly, not to be underestimated. And when I think about Joyce, I think about my mum. My mum was a primary school teacher, and she's got all sorts of friends who kind of ran big businesses and all this kind of stuff. And they do all the talking, this, that, or the other. You know, they used to be in charge. But if you want something done, ask my mum. And in the book, Elizabeth can have all the theories she wants, and she can bring people in, and she can, you know, all of that stuff. But if you want something done, you ask Joyce. You know, and also, you know, Elizabeth find that they're a great double act, and Elizabeth will sort of break down the door, and then Joyce would just sit in a corner and ask the killer question right at the end. And Elizabeth recognises very quickly that Joyce has something that she doesn't have, and Joyce also recognises that Elizabeth has something she doesn't have, which is a lovely basis for a friendship.
Yeah. No, it's full of these unlikely friendships. The other one being Ibrahim and Ron.
Yeah, so Ibrahim was and still is the psychiatrist, and Ron is a trades union official, and a proper, you know, he was around with Scargill in the early 80s and stuff like that. I think it says at one point his picture was never in the paper without the caption, "Talks broke down late last night." That's Ron. But that's the thing I love about it, is they've all got to this stage in their life when they recognise that actually friendship and adventure are things to be cherished and things to hold on to, and especially new friendship and new adventure.
Well, this is one of the most delightful things about the book, is that, you know, you take us into a territory which is often dismissed in a really ageist way as being, you know, people are winding down towards the grave, you know, they're becoming less interesting and also more uniform. You know, they're depicted en masse, and what you do is you introduce us to these very different characters. And also, you know, Cooper's Chase sounds lovely. It sounds like a bit like a boutique gin, but it sounds like a place that I just really very much want to go.
Everybody wants to live there. I mean, it's based on a real place, which I went to, and it's just full of these. It felt like a university halls of residence, but where no one's got any work to do. So they were having such a good laugh. The politics is all there, the gossip is all there. They start drinking at about 11:30, and you start talking to them, and the stories they've got, you know, and the lives that they've lived, and it's just all there.
It's quite lavish, though, the retirement community. And next door, you've got an old folks' home, which isn't as nice and doesn't have as much money. And I do think it's interesting that you have that tension between the people who can afford to have a nice, comfortable retirement and good health care, and the people who can. And that was obviously important for you to kind
It is important. I mean, all the way through. I mean, it's certainly in America they describe it as cosy, and I don't think it is cosy. I think it sounds like it should be cosy because it's about four people in their 70s. But I try and throw the real world at them as much as I can, because again, we sort of think for some reason that people in their 70s can't handle the real world, you know. But of course they can. Of course, they're allies to every progressive cause you want, as long as you chat to them about it. But yeah, I wanted the real world to really come in there, and I wanted, you know, Joyce doesn't come from money, Elizabeth does come from money, Ron doesn't come from money, and I find all those sorts of things interesting. But yeah, I think there's currently this way of living tends to be quite a well-to-do thing, but I don't think it will be in 15, 20 years' time. I think they'll find ways of making this the way that we all have our retirement if we want it.
Val, you blurbed the book. Tell us more about what you thought about it when you got it.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really well put together book. It hangs together very neatly, and that's often an issue with debut novelists. They don't quite know how to make the plot work, but you did that really well. And I loved the characters. I thought they were really interesting. And you're right, there's a tenderness there. And although it deals with quite dark things, and some of the politics that's going on in the background is really quite unsettling, but it still has that warm, fuzzy feel. And I think it's a really good piece of work.
Thank you.
You can see its roots in, you know, the best tradition of the English crime novel. And that at its best is still like, you know, a lovely thing to sit down with.
An English crime novel.
That sounds English, yeah. Oh, I don't think I missed that, Val. Essentially, you're saying, you know what, for an English novel, not bad. That's something quite right.
It's just culturally different.
How come it's in all these wee short chapters?
That's a really good question, and it wasn't conscious for me at all. But so I'll tell you why it was, and then I'll tell you what I think the unconscious reason was. Is I like to do 1,000 words a day. I'm very goal-oriented as a human being. So if I'm writing 1,000 words, I want it to be a whole chapter. I want to finish something in 1,000 words. So all my chapters tend to be about 1,000 words. I think maybe it comes from working in television for so long as well, and having that thing with formats, so as a producer and a presenter, where you think, don't bore anyone, they can switch over at any moment. So absolutely just keep the pace up, OK, and keep introducing new things, but, you know, make sure everyone feels safe and comfortable and they're feeling entertained at all times, but just keep up the pace, and so, yeah, I didn't even think about it until I finished, and I thought, God, there's a lot of chapters in this. But, yeah, I try and do a chapter a day and then move on to the next one. And when there's 5 or 6 main characters, and all the ones who survive return for the second book. And it's lovely because I can keep using, you know, I can keep going back and using someone else's perspective. And then, you know, every 4 or 5 chapters, Joyce gets to write a diary entry, and I can just relax and let her take over the story.
Can I ask, and I may not be giving any spoilers, I don't think it's giving any spoilers, but you can just tell me anyway, the note that gets shoved under her door at the end of the... Is that going to have a role to play in the second book?
The note that is slipped under the door in the very last chapter is very much the beginning of the first chapter of the next book. The next book starts the day after the first book ends.
OK.
It's supposed to be called, I wanted to call it The Following Thursday, but the American publishers say that's not, it doesn't have enough oomph, so we're not allowed to call it that.
I've got a question for you from the book group.
OK.
Yep. It is from Anna, and she said she'd like to ask you about something that's in the acknowledgements. So in the acknowledgements, you say, and I love people who read the acknowledgements. I always read them first and then go to the book. She read the acknowledgements, and in it you go and meet Mark Bellingham, crime writer, and ask him about writing crime, and he says there are 2 secrets to writing crime, and then you don't tell us what they are.
No, exactly.
Come on.
Well, that's one of the secrets of writing crime, isn't it? Do you know what? It's funny because I met Mark when I was doing this. I didn't really tell anyone, but I told Mark because I just said, look, is it crazy to write a book? And he gave me 2 great rules. And I was talking to Mark the other day about this because he said, everyone keeps asking me about these rules now. And I said, well, look, let's keep them to ourselves for a little bit longer because Mark looks like a genius now. Because the rules themselves are quite prosaic. They won't, but, you know...
Is it like sit down and write?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of, but they were very, very helpful to me. But actually, one of them might slightly give people a clue as to what happens in this book. So I'm not revealing it for now.
OK.
But honestly, it makes Mark look like a genius because everyone's going, oh, you've got this big hit book, and it's because Mark gave you these 2 rules, and no one knows what the rules are. And so at some point, I'll give them away, and everyone will be, oh, and then poor old Mark will have to, you know, think up some more rules.
Are you going to... I mean, this has been a huge and deserved, I have to say, smash. You're nearly finished the second one. Will you stop doing the telly and stuff now, or do you like having one thing to go back to?
I think I'll try and keep doing 2. I mean, it's you know, people think that my TV career takes slightly longer than it does because I'm on sort of twice every evening, but I tend to be able to film a week's worth of telly in one day. That's the key. And then in between times, I do have some time. So I think at the moment it seems to work that I can do 3 months of telly and 9 months of writing, and that's doable. And I've signed up for 4 of these now. So certainly for the next 4 years, I'll be doing both. And but you know, with Val doing 34 books and me doing 4, the key thing, the key reason...
You've been doing it a long time,
No,
Richard.
I was leading to something, I promise. But the key is, and it's the same with telly, if I do a series that I love, I want it to be successful. And the reason I want it to be successful is I want to do it again, you know? And with this, the reason that I'm happy that people have read it and liked it is it means they let me do another one. And, you know, they don't let you write 34 books unless the other 33 sell a load of copies. They just don't let you do it. And so my view would be I would just keep writing until suddenly they say you're not allowed to anymore because nobody cares, which has never happened to Val. It happens to most people, and hopefully it won't happen to me for a little while.
Thank you, Richard, Joyce, Elizabeth, Ibrahim, and the rest of the Thursday Murder Club.
A pleasure from all of us.
Now, a poet, illustrator and spoken word artist from Edinburgh, shortlisted for prizes at both the Saboteur and Saltire Awards, and performing for us tonight, it's Iona Lee. Iona, tell us about the poem you're going to give us.
So it is very tenuously connected to the theme of crime. There is a theft in it. It is about death, as a lot of my poetry is, but it is really about memory and the way that we turn our life into stories and narratives so that we have a path through the chaos of existence.
Take us through the path.
The Gardener. Deep within a memory of mine, Mr. Charity is introducing me to his garden. Framed by the Rowan cottage window, I can still see it, sloped so. He is walking me from bed to bed, like a doctor on his rounds, bowing his head to each brave new shoot. We arrive at the raspberry bush, and Mr. Charity tells me that a mysterious little ghost has been stealing his raspberries. My lips are stained, blood red, and my eyes are blue. I wonder what has become of the garden, now that the gardener is gone. Life will always fall into the absences. A garden is not nature-shaped, and if left neglected, it will break its airy chains. Perhaps now, interwoven wild, I tell it to you, tended to. I am the little ghost, haunting my memory, still stealing the raspberries, to share them round.
Thank you, Iona. That's it for tonight. So, thank you to the Neilston Book Group and to my guests, Iona Lee, Val McDermid, Sue Black and Richard Osman. Until next time, happy reading.